going to start with the lasagna. For the noodles, we have marinated zucchini, fresh oregano and thyme. It's getting layers of pistachio basil pesto, sun-dried tomato marinara.
Dinner time. The sights, the smells, the tastes of foods we are fond of. They are like old friends, foods we have grown up with, that are central to our social experiences and part of the pleasure of our daily lives. Food is a love we all share.
Ravioli is one of our signature dishes. Flax crackers and reduced tomatoes with a very sweet white vinaigrette under the bottom. Enjoy!
But not all love affairs are good for us. And sometimes, too much of a good thing comes at a cost. While chefs compete to please our ever-demanding palates and farmers strive to keep our dinner plates full, others are worried about the impact of all this. Is our love affair with food, in particular our love of meat and dairy, good for our health and the future of the planet?
What we got here is a seitan in a mushroom stock, and then it gets served with mushrooms, peppers, tomatoes, onions on a skewer, mashed potatoes. We also do it with cabbage, with strawberry jam and red wine, served with a mushroom sauce and sprouting broccoli.
I got into nutrition with certain ideas in mind, more or less the same as what the public tend to have. But I've been around quite a little while, seen a lot of things. Had a research program at Cornell University and Virginia Tech for many, many years. For about 20 years, I was on various and sundry expert panels in Washington and London and helping to write national policy. And I have to tell you that my views today are dramatically different than what they were 51 years ago. In the 60s, I had an opportunity of being a coordinator of a nationwide program of feeding malnourished children in the Philippines, working with a senior colleague, who was with the U.S. Embassy at the time. I went to the Philippines to help to deal with the childhood malnutrition problems. In my early days, I was enamored with the idea that protein was very important. In particular, animal-based protein from animal sources. And so when we went to the Philippines, of course, we were interested in making sure that Philippine children got enough protein. My surgeon colleague told me one day that he was operating on children 4 years of age and younger for primary liver cancer. This cancer almost entirely occurs in older people, not in children. I started asking around and I got the impression, mostly an impression, I got the impression that the children most likely to get the liver cancer were coming from the few families who were consuming the most protein. You can understand, that's a stark contrast to what I believed. That's why I wanted to do the research.
I have actually traditional cooking background. I worked in French-oriented restaurants, Italian, and I came here because as a chef, it's amazing to have the opportunity to always be working with the most vibrant, colorful, beautiful vegetables. Most of the dishes we're creating here are reworkings of traditional dishes from different cuisines. You know, we have lasagna, we have biryani, we have sushi. This is our sushi rice, which is made from jicama and a little bit of brown rice vinegar. They're shiitake mushrooms. We put a few purple daikon sprouts in here.
I grew up on a kibbutz in Israel. I had a beef cattle ranch farm operation, and I was certain that my life is going to be feeding cows. At the university, I fell in love with applied mathematics and spent the next 15 or so years doing nothing but traditional geophysics. It dawned on me that I can combine my agricultural past and my geophysical present into a single line of research that addresses the integrity of the natural environment. Food is an important contributor to global warming. It is an important contributor to surface water pollution. It is an important contributor to air pollution.
So whenever you eat something, you indirectly exert burden on the natural world. It is clear that we cannot continue the way we have. So what do we go after? What do we change first?
I would say the most important ingredients for this kitchen, organic fresh vegetables, I think is, of course, probably the most also important ingredient. All our produce that we use here is sourced locally, as organic as possible. I'm South African, so we eat a lot of red meat. And then about 3 years ago, I fell in love with a woman that was vegetarian, and I saw the good side of it, and I gave up meat. I don't touch any animal products at all, and I love it. It's been a challenge for me, but it's been amazing. Okay, this is my favorite dish on the menu. Or root veg tart. We've got the tart shells here, which we make up every day. We do about 40 of them a day. The bases of them are buckwheat and all the root veg you can think of in England. Turnips, Swedes, carrots. And then we'll fill it with cashew spinach cream. And then we'll top them with herb tomato.
In 1975, Colin Campbell returned from his work in the Philippines to embark on a groundbreaking research program that would continue for nearly 30 years.
I organized a proposal for the National Institutes of Health to explore the relationship specifically between protein intake and the formation of primary liver cancer in rats. Does protein, as it's increased, does that increase cancer growth rates? That was the question.
In a series of experiments, rats were exposed to a cancer-causing chemical and put on a controlled diet. They were alternately fed 20% or 5% of their total calories from protein. When the rats were fed 20% protein, their tumors started to grow. When they were switched to a 5% protein diet, their tumors dramatically reduced. These experiments were conducted with different carcinogens, different species, and focused on different cancers, and Campbell kept getting similar results.
We could essentially turn on and turn off experimental cancer development just by modest changes in nutrient intake, in this case protein. Now, I think you would agree that's pretty striking. The protein that we were using was casein. Casein is the chief protein of cow's milk. So, oh my gosh, I mean, I'm talking about something here very sacred now. In contrast, if we use soy protein or wheat protein, even when we were feeding it at the higher levels of 20%, we couldn't turn on the cancer.
Campbell's experiments showed that in rats, protein from dairy products promoted cancer growth, but protein from plants, like soy and wheat, did not, even when fed at the same level.
All plant proteins are somewhat limiting in certain amino acids. And so he said, okay, wheat doesn't turn on cancer, for example, wheat protein. It misses an amino acid called lysine. Let's put the lysine back in there so that its amino acid profile is like the casein. When we did that, we turned on cancer. From that perspective, it was a good hypothesis to say that animal proteins as a cluster, as a group, promote cancer like casein did, as opposed to the plant proteins. This is striking for me because I came from a dairy farm, and I milked cows until I went away to school. My father had been a dairy farmer, and all the people in my family were farmers and dairy farmers from Northern Ireland and Scotland, essentially. So, I mean, I was just totally into the farm life, 100%. We butchered our own animals, we collected our own eggs, I did some fishing, I hunted. And then I went away to graduate school to try to promote that idea, that finding ways to produce animal protein more effectively and efficiently was a good idea. We could help to solve problems in the world. And what my research became was quite counter to that. It was hard to just accept the animal studies and then turn around and saying something really major about human health. But we could not have done this study in humans. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. It's like tobacco smoking and lung cancer, for example. We've never really done the study to take a group of people and say, you smoke for the next 10 years. You smoke as much as you possibly can. And take another group of people and say, no, you don't smoke. We haven't done that kind of study. In theory, that's what science demands.
What Campbell needed was the chance to study a human population, to see if there was a relationship between diet and cancer. And soon, he was going to get it.
I have sensitivities to dairy, and there really wasn't anything out there for me to have, and especially no bakery for me to go to. And I knew that I wasn't alone, and I knew that there were plenty of other people who wanted to eat desserts that taste good.
We're free of all animal products and byproducts, so all casein, lactose, dairy, everything under that umbrella.
I didn't know anything about baking. I taught myself, and they were not delicious in the beginning, I must say. But I ate them anyways. But I think that if people have an intuitive connection with ingredients and baking and making food in general, there's always a way.
I just put in baking powder. Now I'm putting in salt. There are no eggs in the recipes, so I'll also put a little xanthan gum in. It's actually a bacteria that binds the liquids and the dries together.
People who come in and they're really skeptical because of, oh, there's no sugar in this, there's no, well, what's in it, no flavor, and it's just sort of, you just sort of coax them into, well, just try it, and then I don't have to talk anymore, because you put it in your mouth, and then they're like, oh, okay.
Nothing changes the face of the planet as much as the way we produce our food. And since that has such a big impact on the environment, on other people, and of course on billions of non-human animals, I think you have to think of this as an ethical issue. You have to think of the choices that you're making in terms of what you eat as choices with ethical consequences. And so I think that's why we should regard this as one of the central ethical issues. After all, it's something we all do, 2 or 3 times a day.
In 2006, Pam Martin and I compared the average American diet, purely in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, to alternative diets.
Gidon Eshel wanted to identify which diet has the biggest impact on global warming. The average American diet consists of plants, eggs, dairy, poultry, fish, and red meat. The most significant greenhouse gas associated with the production of food for this diet is methane.
Cows are ruminants. Methane is a byproduct of that. They burp it, mostly. Some of it comes the other end, but most of it comes through burps.
A poultry diet is made up of plants, eggs, dairy, and chicken or turkey.
Poultry is a pretty efficient little animal, but there's the CO2 just related to fossil fuel combustion. In addition to that, chicken or turkey manure undergo chemical decomposition that results in the emissions of nitrous oxide to the atmosphere.
A lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet consists of plants, eggs, and dairy.
Interestingly, poultry diet is actually superior to lacto-ovo-vegetarian. The reason for that is that lacto-ovo-vegetarians have been shown to eat more animal-based dairy and egg in their diets.
Eshel compared the average American diet to a diet completely based on food from plant sources.
If you eat the mean American diet, you are responsible for the emissions of 1.5 tons of CO2 equivalent above and beyond what your fellow plant eater is responsible for. To put this in perspective, if you switch to the most efficient car in the market, that switch will result in the reduction of your emissions by 1 ton.
When we emit all these greenhouse gases, we're contributing to global warming, we're contributing to the melting of the ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and therefore we're causing sea levels to rise. And we will be inundating the farmlands of people in Bangladesh, for example, or in Egypt, where there are a lot of people living very close to sea level. So we're really responsible actually for drowning them, not just for not saving them.
This mommy likes a lot. You want to try?
Red meat is, in some sense, the worst offender, so to speak, when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, other forms of animal-based foods, while superior to red meat, are not as advantageous as plant-based foods still. So you have plant-based foods here. They are the least environmentally impactful. You have red meat here, and that's the most impactful. And you can ask yourself, well, where are my choices located?
Some people think that plant-based food is a bit boring. We like to prove them wrong. The biggest challenge for doing plant-based food is forgetting the whole classical idea of having 1 meat and 2 veg. You've only got the veg, so you've got to try and make the whole dish the centerpiece. Nice one, straight up.
When people come in and they're like used to eating meat, they don't know really how to expect, and they sort of think, oh, it's just like a light salad all the time. You know, when they have the food, they're like, the texture, the flavors, like, they're like, wow, this is amazing. Sometimes they don't even know that there's absolutely no animal product. They just like absolutely love it, and the herbs and everything. So it's really good. Thank you, Mr. B.
Professor Campbell spent years investigating the connection between dietary protein and cancer promotion in rats. but wasn't sure how far his discoveries applied to humans.
Even if I was pretty confident in the applicability of the animal study data for the human population, my colleagues wouldn't agree with that. They would want to see, more confirmation, especially with humans. And for me, that's entirely reasonable because that's the way I think too.
In the early 1980s, Campbell had the opportunity to conduct a study with a human population in China. It was to be the first collaboration between Beijing, Cornell, and Oxford University, and would take over 20 years to complete. The study was highly acclaimed at the time by one of the world's leading epidemiologists, Sir Richard Doll.
This remarkable work, which Dr. Campbell initiated, really was making use of the fact that China was the last medical frontier to cross and to where one could discover new things.
In the 1970s, there was a systematic survey of who died of what all over China. And every disease that was common in one place was rare somewhere else. You could find one county where more than 10% of the men would die from liver cancer. Then you could go a few hundred miles away and you'd find that less than 1% of the men would die from liver cancer. You could do the same with cancer of the throat. You could do the same with having strokes, death from stroke. Every disease that is common in one place is rare somewhere else. And that means that all of the diseases that are common in China, or at least the diseases of middle age that are common in China, are largely avoidable by some humanly practicable way of living. And so the next question was, well, how are they going to be avoided? And that's where the collaboration between Beijing, Cornell, and then Oxford came in.
The researchers chose 65 of the Chinese counties with unusually high or low disease death rates and collected data from thousands of Chinese citizens. Urine and blood samples were taken, hormonal factors and viral factors were measured, along with exposure to toxic chemicals like pesticides, heavy metals, and mycotoxins. The researchers studied differences in lifestyle, smoking, exercise habits, and diet. Laboratories around the world analyzed the data, and over the years the findings were published. Studies looked at the relationship between, for example, fat and breast cancer, or between colon cancer and fiber. One study that really stood out was the relationship between heart disease and blood cholesterol levels.
We in the West regard heart attacks as just a sort of normal thing. It's what happens when you get middle-aged. You have a heart attack, and maybe you could do something about it. But anyway, it's normal for the heart to degenerate. At least that's how we think about it. And it's not normal. And it's the Chinese experience that shows that it's not normal. The Chinese peasants eat plants, and they have very little cholesterol in their blood, and they have far fewer heart attacks than the lowest risk that you would find in the West. So I think we can learn from them that there is no such thing as a normal Englishman. Trying to say what's a normal cholesterol in America or England, it's like taking lots and lots of people who all smoke cigarettes and then saying, well, what's a normal smoking habit? Well, I suppose you'd say a normal smoking habit is 15 or 20 cigarettes a day, but of course really a normal smoking habit is not smoking. Humans were not evolved to smoke cigarettes. Now, there may be many aspects of the way of life of the poor that the rich would not willingly emulate, even to avoid heart attacks. But if you eat the sort of food which is based mostly on plants, then you'll have very few heart attacks in middle age.
In this book, rather large body of data, in fact, the New York Times called this the most comprehensive collection of data ever. And I think it was, and may still be in some ways. We collected data so that we ended up with a total of 367 items of information, as we call it, or variables. We had about 4 dozen different kinds of disease rates. That meant about a dozen different cancers and another 3 dozen or so other kinds of diseases. And we ended up with 2 aggregates of disease types. One group we've often called diseases of poverty, infectious diseases, inadequate nutrition. The other group of diseases turned out to be the cancers, heart disease, diabetes. Those are the kind of diseases that tended to appear in the more affluent areas. With that in mind, I hypothesized that if all these diseases tend to occur in a common area, is there something we measured in this book, in this study? Is there something there that might associate with those diseases? So we started looking for some things. And the one thing that really stood out was blood cholesterol levels, diseases of affluence, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and so forth. Those diseases would tend to rise. Their mortality rates would tend to go up when blood cholesterol started to go up. And so we found as cholesterol would go up like this, it was highly associated with the consumption of animal-based foods, animal protein. It would tend to go up when more animal protein was consumed. It tended to go down when more plant protein was consumed. So there was sort of a signal. But there was a signal. This led to this.
The evidence from the China study was a major turning point for Campbell. It led him to investigate the work of other researchers on animal and plant-based diets.
Recommendation number 1. And this was the one that said, eat a plant-based diet. First one that said that.
A lot of people think that we don't have eaters, but I know because I know I'm not vegetarian, so I got rice and beans. For 20 years, I became vegan. As you can see, we have just regular mashed potatoes with garlic and onion. We have the seitan, onions, we have tomato paste. We have some haricot herbs. And we put this really, really rich mustard gravy. We had like a mustard, a little bit of arrowroot, vegetable broth. One of the greatest plates. Depending on the season, you get used to use research a lot of vegetables. Like right now, we have some purple cauliflower, which is great. They give you like extra color. We have one cauliflower, we saw this one of our dishes, like signature dish. And we have like purple cauliflower and yellow cauliflower. That is only in this season. That's the beauty of it. Regular paella made with basmati rice. As you can see, a lot of vegetables, but it's not just rice.
Raising animals is involved with a lot more environmental issues than simply greenhouse gas emissions. Another very important aspect is the contribution to dead zones.
There are some places where the oceans are greatly affected by pollution from agriculture. One of the best examples is the Gulf of Mexico off the southern United States, which takes the drainage from the Mississippi River. And so, it's basically the drainage from the heartland of the U.S., which is where most of U.S. agriculture is located. And there's sufficient nutrients running into the Gulf of Mexico, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, from agriculture that every year the Gulf of Mexico has a dead zone, sometimes the size of, say, the state of New Jersey. It's quite vast. And in this dead zone, the waters don't have any oxygen or have very low levels of oxygen, so that virtually all the creatures are killed or can't live.
When you have swordfish that happen to wander in, well, maybe it can swim fast enough into open ocean and survive. But most small fishes are unable to achieve that because the spatial extent of those dead zones is just vast. So they just die.
One of the main causes of dead zones is the discharge of reactive nitrogen from farms. Eshel has been investigating how our diet affects the amount of reactive nitrogen released into the oceans.
Each one of the dots, of which there are 1,000 here and 1,000 here, represents the annual diet of one person. The further up you go, the more your food choices contribute to the scope of the dead zone. The thing that is so striking about this is the average American diet releases into the environment about 3.5 times as much reactive nitrogen as the plant-based diet. These are not subtle differences. We're not talking here about improving your environmental footprint by 20%. We're talking here about dropping it to 1/3 of what it was.
Arguments about the oceans being limitless so we can't harm them are a bit like the old-fashioned arguments that have to do with air pollution. Well, we'll just build taller smokestacks and the pollution will go up so high in the air that we won't have to worry about it. And now, of course, we know that that's rubbish. If you build taller smokestacks, the pollutants are still there. They still affect us. So, we have to treat the oceans as an integral part of our planet, too, not just some vast dumping ground.
The large-scale problem of reactive nitrogen discharge into the environment has to do with the cows and manure management problems, and the effluent from a perfectly organic large-scale feeding operation will contribute to the scope of the dead zone as effectively as the effluent from a conventional large-scale feeding operation.
I had lots of publications. I've had 300 and some publications that were peer-reviewed, and I had already been offered the top position, full professor with tenure, when I was only 40 years old. I had everything I wanted. I mean, I didn't need a promotion. And I knew that if I started to follow what I believed to be true, my professional reputation was going to take a hit. But science is supposed to be engendering debate. So it was a matter of the truth. It was what the evidence said. Do I believe this or I don't believe it?
After decades of research in his own laboratory and in China, Campbell began to study the findings of other researchers who were investigating the relationship between diet and disease.
I think this study here is perhaps one of the greatest studies, most important studies of the last century. It was done by a man by the name of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Jr. Dr. Esselstyn was a famous surgeon. He was once listed in one of the top 100 doctors. He got to a point in the 1980s, he said, wait a minute, I'm doing all this surgery, what am I doing? He sort of started thinking, he's not really accomplishing much. So he decided to do a nutritional experiment.
I retired from surgery, but what has personally motivated me to continue in medicine was that it was very clear that my research with patients with severe cardiovascular disease was really sort of sprouting wings. The fact that there was very little else of this type of research going on made me feel that it was just too exciting. If you were a cardiac surgeon today and you want to go to rural China or Central Africa or the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico and earn a living, forget it. You better plan on selling pencils. There is no heart disease there. So it didn't seem like too much in the way of rocket science to say, look, if these cultures, which are plant-based, don't ever have coronary artery disease, wouldn't it be a rational thing to ask patients who already have established heart disease, can we get them to go plant-based and see if we can't arrest their disease or perhaps even reverse it?
In the late 80s, Esselstyn gathered together a group of 18 patients seriously ill with heart disease who collectively had had a total of 49 heart attacks, bypass surgeries, and angioplasties. They were all eating a typical Western diet.
How are you, Doc?
Anthony, how you doing?
Good.
You look great.
I was waiting for your call until yesterday. I had to change my haircut appointment. So my barber's going to be mad at me.
Anthony was one of the actual original group of patients with my original study. When he first came to see me, he had severe coronary artery disease.
It was New Year's Eve party, and I was so enjoying my dancing. Suddenly, boom! My God, it was even just like that. That's when I saw this doctor. Don't worry about it, he says. We are well known in this area of surgery called bypass, in a layman term, And he says, you most likely will need 5 of them. Anyway, I had an open heart, 5 bypass surgery done. A week and a half later, I have some funny feeling again. Then you know what they told me? They said, looks like one is already shut down, and the other one wasn't doing too well.
In a week and a half?
Yeah. The one was weak, also was shut down. And I said, how about the other 3? They couldn't answer me. They said, that's something we just couldn't answer you. My mind went through about everything. What did I did wrong? Nobody told me I did anything wrong. I was doing a little exercise. I was drinking the milk I was supposed to, calcium and protein every single day. And I was very healthy. I ain't gonna waiting for the 3 other things to shut down. That's when depression sets in, caused by severe fears. And so, like hopeless, you're ready to give your life up. So the psychiatrist said, he said, before you do that, it's a messy thing, he said. He said, before you do that, I would want you to go to see a fellow that he is working and doing a research. So he wrote it down. I couldn't even spell it. I couldn't even pronounce it. What is that? Esselstein, Esselstein, Esselstein? What is this?
Anthony joined Dr. Esselstyn's study. Along with the other patients, he was put on a plant-based diet and cholesterol-lowering medication. Their health was carefully monitored over the following years.
This happens to be a 54-year-old security guard where, when we first saw him, this is the right coronary artery, and where that arrow is was defined in our coronary angiography core laboratory as a 30% blockage, and then several years later, you can see the blockage has disappeared. In the 12 years on the study, which made it the longest of its type in the medical literature, we found that 17 of the 18 had no further coronary events. One little sheep, after 6 years, wandered from the flock. Got into all the wrong foods. Got a recurrence of angina, ended up having a bypass, but now he's back with the flock.
I don't really know how to explain that, other than I'm walking with my 2 feet, I sleep normal, and about my life, I'm looking at you beautiful girls, I get excited like a teenagers, and normal. Isn't that normal or not? But nobody even knows that in 2 more years, I'll be 80 years old. They should be thinking about setting me aside, but no. Except I didn't still continue to lose my hair. And I want to ask you about that too.
I know.
I'm still alive. That's the important thing, though.
Now, I want to clarify something. As I mentioned, that this was a very, very intensive shepherding of these people in the early research group. And that was sort of, I think, at least I felt it was essential, so that we could find out whether or not we could actually demonstrate proof of concept namely that you are able, through appropriate nutrition, to not only halt but to arrest this disease.
So want to walk out to the garden?
Yeah, let's do it.
Where are the cows today? Oh, no, that's not the herd. Because they'll be coming in pretty soon.
Professor Eschel has come to visit Martin Ping, who runs a small-scale organic farm in upstate New York.
These are really good just raw sliced up in the salad.
Oh, it's good.
Yep. No, I have a real fondness for these. That's still good.
Yeah.
Actually, here too. For sure. Well, I know which way I'm walking home tonight. I have to stop and get a little feta cheese. And I have a hankering for green salad, or for Greek salad. I actually will admit that, oh, here comes the girls.
Professor Eschel has been investigating how this small-scale organic farm compares to a large-scale organic farm in terms of its contribution to oceanic dead zones.
You can measure the composition of the water entering the system over there, which we did. And you can measure the composition of the water exiting the system over there. And you can see that the effluent coming out of these farms is dramatically better than the effluent coming out of an industrial scale farm.
This is my commute to work. Some people wade through traffic and I wade through a stream. It's really awesome. I love it.
The reason why this small-scale farm is better in terms of the amount of reactive nitrogen released into the oceans is because it uses the land less intensively.
The amount of fertility we have for our garden is dependent on the number of cows we have. The number of cows we have is dependent on the amount of pasture land we have in order for those cows to have a grass-based diet without having to import any kind of feed or supplement for them. So you have this system. We would say you actually couldn't have long-term sustainable vegetable garden without having the animals for the fertility, some animals.
Let's take a look at this. This is the essence of it all. Cow cake. There is no industrial process that can have such a perfect balance of the nutrients as we see here. So that's why cows are really, really essential.
It's black gold, farmer's gold.
The way modern conventional agriculture works is high input, high throughput, high output. Hawthorne Valley and small-scale biodynamic or organic farms offer an alternative to that. They readily accept lesser throughput, lesser output, lesser productivity, producing almost no reactive nitrogen discharge into the environment.
Small-scale organic farming may help to save the environment, but to feed the world, we will have to change more than just our farming practices.
There's a heck of a lot of people to feed in this world. If industrial agriculture isn't going to be able to do it, and the small niche farming, as it stands now, isn't going to be able to do it. But if you extend that to how you see your diet, how much of your food is vegetable and grain, if the meat is a small part, the equation would change quite a bit. I don't remember ever eating anything so tasty.
Yeah.
I've been cooking all my life, natural, food-based. You'll have to excuse me, but I do have a couple of tickets up. So this is our classic sundae. It's a little take on traditional banana split, chocolate and vanilla ice cream. It's our ice cream, dairy-free, and its base is cashew and young coconut meat, agave, vanilla, touch of salt, and water. The cashews and coconut meat is what gives it its creaminess. And then it's just a matter of flavoring chocolate syrup and some candied almonds with a little bit of salt and some agave nectar. We use a lot of agave nectar. It comes from agave cactus, probably more commonly known for making tequila, but it has a great raw application.
Is that going to satisfy someone who's used to a dairy?
Definitely. Amazing texture, that rich, creamy texture that you're going to find in the best of the dairy ice creams without so much guilt.
Since Dr. Esselstyn's original study, he has treated a further 200 patients by changing their diet.
The stents, the angioplasties, and the bypass surgery can be absolutely life-saving. The challenge to us as a profession is to do what we can so that the illnesses that today are requiring surgery never get to that point. This happened to be a young physician, 44 years of age. He had a heart attack, and you could see this artery that suddenly gets to be moth-eaten and diseased. This was narrowed over such a long segment that he was not a candidate to have these stents just stuffed in one after the other. And it was too far down the artery for a bypass operation. So I said, why don't you consider going plant-based? And he said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm not going to take any of these cholesterol-lowering statin drugs. I don't trust them. There's too many side effects, I feel. So I said, not a problem. So he just did it. And 30 months later, he had a repeat angiogram, and as you can see over here, it's completely resolved. Obesity can contribute to this, and metabolic syndrome can contribute to it. But that doesn't spare the patients who are slender. I mean, we treat many patients who are slender. We treat many actually fascinating athletes. I mean, athletes who run marathons, and yet they're crumbling from disease of their arteries because of the horrible food they're eating. This is not to discredit exercise, and exercise is a marvelous bonus. When you embark in research where everybody is extremely skeptical, I mean, God, how in the world can food have the kind of medicinal value when we have all these sophisticated drug companies? There's a certain competitive spark that is lit. It's the challenges in life that are exciting.
It wasn't out of the blue. We had been talking about it for a long time. We didn't eat meat one time. We didn't eat dairy a little later. And did we give up oil in '84, Essie? Oh, yeah. But, I cooked. I did that. It was hard, and we weren't perfect. But it was, I knew it was right.
What is agreed in the scientific community is that the initiation of cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, coronary artery disease, is that the magnificent carpet of endothelial cells that lines our blood vessels becomes progressively injured. And really, it's only in about the last 10, 15 years that we understand, in hindsight, why it was that our program was working even earlier than these discoveries have shown, namely that we now know that certain foods will injure the endothelial cells. Processed oils injure endothelium. Dairy products injure endothelium. Meat, fish, chicken, animal protein injures endothelium. It seems so logical in patients who are severely ill with what is an endothelial disease to take away all the products that are causing their endothelial disease. I have not heard any of our most severe critics say we're penalizing or injuring the patient. Even many of our greatest critics agree this will work, but it's only the rare patient who'll do it. Nonsense. Give them a chance, and they absolutely rejoice.
About a year ago, I started noticing symptoms that were consistent with heart disease, and the doctor really wanted me to go into the hospital and have a catheterization. I asked that they step on the brakes a little bit before we did that, and so I could consult Dr. Esselstyn.
I wanted him to go in and have a catheterization. I wanted him to go through the procedure. I was scared for him. And he's off on his, I'm thinking he's off on this crazy thing. Oh my gosh. We are both in our 50s and we have children and grandchildren, and I want to see them grow up.
We all agreed that we would try Dr. Esselstyn's program before I actually went in for any surgery or procedures. I was a meat and potatoes person. Most of the time when I ate my vegetables, they were covered with butter and cheese. We stopped all of that all in one afternoon.
And went grocery shopping.
Yes, we went grocery shopping.
Tell them about your stress.
Okay. Dr. Esselstyn, we're anxious to see some quantitative number as to my improvement. So I scheduled the second stress echo test, started walking. Bottom line is that I doubled the amount of time that I spent on the treadmill. Of course, my cholesterol's way down. My blood sugar's normal. I had high triglycerides in the past, and that's dropped. And after 9 months on a plant-based diet, I still have heart disease, but I'm making great improvement.
Silken tofu, maple syrup, lime juice, plus the zest. These are good.
Good morning. This is Dr. Esselstyn. How is it going? None of this could have happened without Ann, because I may tell them the why of their disease. No fat yogurt, no meat, fish, chicken. But then they're left like a puppy in the deep grass. How? And Ann comes along and says, here's how. Right.
It's a kale sandwich. Kale has got thick stem, which makes it hard to eat. So you put your right hand here and you take your left hand and you pull, and then you have a handful of kale that looks just like, it's like spinach with heft when you cook it. And it's so much fun. In 2 seconds. It's crazy. No time. And in the meantime, over on the stove, I have water boiling. And I'm going to cover it. And it's going to cook for about 4 minutes. Mestemacher bread. I like it really toasted well so it turns into a cracker. And then it is so good. Cilantro. And the thing that I love the most about this sandwich is the lemon. I'm going to get all this zest off this lemon so I can put it on that kale. And these stems, they'd be nice right in here. You can do anything with them. And just cut up this a little more. But it's ready. Let it all drain out here. It's with lemon zest and lemon juice. It makes everything taste so much better without any fat. Okay, let's see about this toast. So now, here we go. Hummus. This is hummus without tahini. Chickpeas, lemon, and garlic. There's no oil in this, so you can just slather this on nice and thick. So we love that. And then I'm going to sprinkle some green onions. and some cilantro. You can use parsley instead. And then my lemons. And I cut them in little pieces. Essie makes me so mad. He does not like lemon in his, so I will leave his without. Handfuls of kale on top of here. Looks crazy, and you will not believe how good it is. I'm gonna just sprinkle a little of lemon pepper on top. That's ready to go after I cut it. Okay, kale sandwiches.
The standard American diet is only a variety of about 13 fruits and veg.
More than
Isn't that sad?
yeah. Well, I
you're
think
13 in a row here.
I know.
In the winter, it's really nice to highlight squashes and have a nice hot cooked soup. Next, I have a nice, beautiful buttercup squash. I was raised in restaurants. My grandmother, my mom, my brother, all of them have been really into food.
This is okra.
Really? That's how okra grows?
Yeah, this is okra, and this.
I have never seen okra grow.
Well, there it is.
Huge, there's okra.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
I was looked at as the black sheep for a long time because I was on this quest of health. Oh, I must be on drugs. I must be completely crazy because why is he eating just plant food?
Take a bite of that, Chad.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, my grandma would make an escarole soup that was so nice.
Oh, it's great. It's great for escarole.
It wasn't until a few years ago that I started opening my own restaurants that my family was just like, oh, maybe he is doing something right, you know? And especially when they visited the restaurants.
What are you making?
I gotta make dinner.
You need my help?
No. Sorry,
I
babe.
figured. When I cook, it's very predictable.
And the house is a mess. If she's making something with flour, it's
Yes.
flour all over the place.
And my daughter is very frustrated. When is Papa coming back home? When is he gonna start cooking again?
Right before it's finished, I'm gonna add some parsley in there. And this is just a nice, comforting Sunday afternoon soup here.
This is what, when I was a boy, a very young boy in Israel, growing up in a kibbutz, this is what an individual family farm looked like. 12, 15 cows, a few calves, and that was enough. But I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think that this represents the new way we will feed the masses.
In the last 50 years, the world's population has increased from 2.5 to more than 6.5 billion people. And as the population grows and demand for animal products grows, more and more land is needed for food production. So how are we to feed the world? In the last few decades, we have turned to industrial farming for the solution.
Well, one of the oldest arguments in favour of industrial farming is that we needed to feed a growing population. It's also one of the most fallacious arguments because industrial farming reduces the amount of food available for human consumption. It doesn't increase it. It relies on growing grain and feeding that grain to animals, sometimes soybeans as well as grains, so the meat may be artificially cheap based on getting subsidised grain. And after feeding it to the animals, depending on the species, say from beef, we might get back just 10%, just 1/10 of the food value of what we feed to them. From chicken, we might get back a third, but we're still wasting 2/3 of the food that we're feeding to them, even in the case of chicken, which the chicken industry says it's so amazingly efficient.
Professor Eschel has been evaluating what type of diet can produce the most food from each acre of land.
This is where we are right now. This is how America eats right now. The average American diet
comprising dairy and beef and pork and turkey and plants consumes roughly twice as much land per person as would be required if that person consumed the plant-based diet. Those are dramatic differences, not small.
Lila, you okay, sweetie?
Yeah, I have soup.
Soup is good.
Most people can have no larger spatial effect than their dietary choices. Most of us do not clear-cut vast swaths of forest or plow vast fields. What we do is we consume food, thereby contracting to others those activities.
Full. Full. Ah. So good.
Every acre devoted to food production is an acre unavailable for wildlife. Biodiversity losses, and especially extinctions, are forever. That's it. Once you lost a particular species that took tens of millions of years to evolve, you lost tens of millions of years of genetic knowledge.
After a lifetime of study, Colin Campbell has developed a controversial theory about the way in which an animal-based diet affects our health.
Meat and dairy and other animal-based foods do not initiate cancer. I have to go back to the model for cancer. Cancer gets initiated, which involves chemicals or viruses attacking the DNA. That's where the cancer starts. These kind of foods do not initiate cancer in that sense. What they do is they have all the nutrients and other factors in there that create the condition, the culture, for the growth of these cancers. It creates the condition for the rise of blood cholesterol, and it creates the condition for the development of basically atherogenesis, leading to heart disease. In other words, these things and these kind of foods are actually like fertilizer. Reach a level of evidence that you accept or don't accept, depending on what you want to do next. Can you make prediction from the level of knowledge you have? And I will predict that people consuming animal foods are going to experience problems.
In the process of food production, what is the single distinction I can draw that separates the wheat from the chaff, that separates that which is extremely important from that which is truly secondary or tertiary? The answer is the dividing line between plant and animal-based diet. The plant-based diets consume dramatically less land, release dramatically less reactive nitrogen, and emit dramatically less greenhouse gases than the animal-based diet.
Some people think that, really what we should do is just focus on pressuring the government to make changes. And of course, it would be great if the government were to make changes. The government should stop subsidizing factory farming. That would be a big deal. But we should not ignore the difference that we can make ourselves, even if it seems small. People might say, well, it's a difference you can't notice. But in the end, it does add up.
It's so easy to fall back and say, well, people really won't change. They love some of these bad habits. But we can make this happen. In the next decade, the paradigm will change. Maybe less.
Science enjoying such a status in our society. People rely on science, and we're paid. We use the public's money to do the things we do, and so I think we have a responsibility to go back and tell them. Policy people always wanting to pull back. Don't say what they really believe, because it would have upset the industry. I'm not going to be inhibited by anything or anybody. And because it's far too important. Far too important. Plant-based diets is where the health is. Animal-based diets are not. But I also want to put a second thing on that. It's whole plant-based foods. What do I mean by that? You know, you can be a vegan and consume plant-based foods and do it all wrong. Here's the way you do it. You take the whole food, take the sugar out, you take the white flour out, you take some fat out because it's supposed to be good, plant oil is supposed to be good. You put it all together and you get a Danish or a donut. That's plant-based diet, right? But that's not health. That gets us into trouble. So what I'm really driving toward here is that the whole food, eating it intact, figuring out ways how to prepare it and eating the whole food is where you get the real health from.
It's all about whole grains, not processed grains. So whole grains, whole legumes, and then the biggest part of it is fruit and veg in their most unaltered state as you can prepare them. Cooking animal proteins comes very familiar to a lot of people because that's the way that most of us were raised. Getting to know the plant kingdom a little bit better is what I find very exciting. When I find a new mushroom, when I find a new veg, when I find a new fruit, look at how beautiful these mushrooms are. I mean, you can't go wrong with how gorgeous these are. And they're so meaty. Shifting the way we think about vegetables, making vegetables as the center of the plate rather than an animal product, or just reconfiguring the plate. If you're going to eat animal products, have a little bit smaller portion, add much more vegetables to the plate. We're going to make some seitan. Seitan is a wheat protein, whole wheat flour. All right, then I have nutritional yeast. I have some onion powder, a little bit of chipotle seasoning, some veg stock, Marcello wine. The sweetener, I'm using a little bit of maple. And I'm not using oil in this, so I want to cook it in a liquid. Delicious on their own. Seitan is done now. It's a great substitution for a roast. If you're going to have a roast dinner, that's just so nice. Some lettuce, tomato thrown in a wrap. You can throw some barbecue sauce on it, throw it in a sandwich. Good on some stuffing. We have a little bit of mashers. Get some of that seitan roast. Let's serve some of this gravy, piping hot gravy. It's a holiday feast right there.
Our relationship with food is complicated. It's part of who we are, what makes our culture, and it creates a sense of community. But really, food is a choice. And every one of us can choose to repeat old eating habits or to make the next dinner a new one.
Man, would you give me a little salad?
My favorite vegetable is carrots, then my favorite berry is raspberries. The corn that Ann gets at the farm. Quinoa rice, black beans, water.
You mean bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula, and asparagus.
You want them off? Put it down and take it off. You want some? Here, you can have. Oh, that's it. That's the only one of this slice. But you are eating them, so why am I taking them off?
You have to have some of this too. This arugula is just really, there's nothing else quite so flavorful as. Cheers.
These are peas. You know, they were the Chinese peas. You know, to eat the whole thing. This is really good. These are really good. You want to taste a piece?